Today, Library Value Day, we have invited Kimberly Silk to provide our keynote speech. Kimberly is a librarian with a background in academic and data librarianship.
I'm just going to read that whole thing.
And a passion for conducting research to evaluate how libraries impact their communities. As a consultant, she continues to work with libraries across Canada with measurement and evaluation projects. She is co-author of So Much More, The Economic Impact of Toronto Public Library and the City of Toronto, published in 2013, and the first library economic impact study of its kind in Canada. Her most recent collaboration with Dr. Bill Irwin, Creating a Culture of Evaluation, Taking Your Library from Talk to Action, was published by OLA Press in May of 2017. Okay.
Thanks, Martin.
Here's your flipper.
Is it really that large? Yes. Bonjour, good morning. Okay, which microphone's working, Steve? Oh boy, okay. These are my cheat sheets. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui, mais English is my first language, so I'll stick with that, if you don't mind. So this morning I'm going to take some time to talk to you guys about library value. We'll use the word value as a good bucket to talk about the value of libraries, and today specifically public libraries. I really feel very strongly that libraries are just so crucial to the community, and I put all kinds of libraries into that category, and I put community into every kind of community into that category too. So my day job is working with academic libraries. My passion and my little consulting firm on the side works with public libraries. I've worked in special libraries, so which it only means that it doesn't fall into the public or academic bucket. It means that they're just different. They have unique and special communities and perhaps collections to go with that. So my buddy Steve's going to look after my French slides. I'm going to look after my English slides. And here we go.
We're off to a good start.
I know, but you know what? It had to happen, right? Like this had to happen. I have an agenda on the next slide that tells you what I'm going to talk about. Hey, there it is. Let's go. What am I have to point here? Yeah. There we are. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different library studies that have been done around the world. We've got a few in Canada and growing number in Canada. There's quite a few that have been done in the United States, and globally there's quite a few that have been done as well. And so we're going to go over some of those. I want to talk about the importance of moving from measuring economic impact, which tends to be focused very much on a return on investment that a library gives to their community, tends to be very focused on a financial return on investment, which is a very, very narrow lens to look at value, and how we can move from just looking at how much money a library puts into their community, or the financial value of the library being in the community and what it gives in terms of financial return, because economic value is bigger than just the financial piece. And more importantly, the social impact is where we really want to get to in terms of this kind of research. I'm going to talk a little bit about stakeholders, and that conversation is going to continue on throughout the day. I've noticed in your really cool notebooks that there's a whole section talking about stakeholders. It's probably one of the most important conversations you need to have, and constantly. And then we're going to talk about some of the future plans, some of the research that's kicking around out there, what's sort of coming up, and how everyone in this room can get as involved or not as they want to. And then there's time for discussion. So let's see. I don't know. Maybe I'll just hit the button.
I went the wrong way.
Okay, so OLS North has my slides, and are you guys are you making copies of the slides available to attendees if they want them, or?
They'll be available on our website after the conference.
Perfect. So you'll see that this is impact studies that have been done in Canada recently. So the Toronto Public Library study that was done in 2013 was one of the first studies that was very thorough about figuring out how all of a library's activities contribute financially to the city, and how much value an individual citizen of Toronto, in this case, what was the financial value that they received simply because the library was there. Whether they used the library or not was kind of immaterial, but because the library was there in their community, they, I think it was like $5. See, I can't even remember my own numbers anymore. But it was $5.63 was the, so $5.63 per citizen of Toronto was the value that was received because the library is there. And ROI is usually expressed in percentages, and so you can see that in the city of Toronto, when we, for the year 2012, because the study was published in 2013, so we used 2012 figures, that the ROI was $4.63. So pretty good, right? Now, we all know that Toronto is a strange place. I know that because I live there. I know that because I didn't grow up there. So Toronto is unlike any other system, even in North America, never mind Canada. At the time, it had 98 branches. It's got 100 branches. That's crazy. And the city is growing so fast that we have an incredible amount of diversity. And in that area of the Greater Toronto, Hamilton area, it just continues to expand and expand. So in terms of looking at these numbers, it's really important to think about them in terms of context. One of the biggest challenges that we had after we did the TPL study, which was so challenging and so much fun and has been so rewarding, is that there's been lots of other systems that have taken the model, which works for everybody, and applied it to their own library system. The problem is that the results are going to look different. What if I can use my little pointy thing? Now, let's leave it there for a second. So, can you guys see this? Okay. So, 2013, we did TPL. That census population, of course, it's much bigger now. We're over 3 million now. 98 branches, ROI of 463. Halton Hills, considerably smaller community, but still part of the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, GTHA. 2 branches, 304. Not a bad number. Milton, similarly sized, a little bit bigger. Again, still part of the Golden Horseshoe there. 467. So you can see all the way down. And what I want you to pay attention to is the population sizes, the number of branches, and yet the ROI is pretty much in the same bucket. Like it's really not that far off. What happens is that when you have a system like Stratford Public Library, which is a unique community, it's small, but like a lot of other tourism areas, it swells to almost double its size in the summertime. They have one branch, and one of the reasons that their ROI is so high is because they're getting so much value out of that one branch. So when you look at other systems, say, I'm going to say, well, okay, so Vancouver Island Regional, huge geographic area. They're looking at the whole island, 38 branches. And so their ROI is kicking around 335. So it may feel a bit low, but it's so specific to the context of it being a huge region. And one of my frustrations has been that when libraries come back with an ROI that they feel isn't comparably good, that they worry about that. And so one of the things that I've been working on is trying to get people to understand the context, that comparing one community to another is really, really unfair to that community. And please don't. Use those numbers to strengthen your own advocacy, to strengthen your own marketing and ways to think about all the things that the library does to contribute to that community. Libraries always punch above their weight. It's just the way that we're made. I mean, any business would be thrilled to pieces to get ROI like that. And some of my colleagues get stressed out about percentages and numbers. So please don't. So let's go to the next slide and I'll show you some other studies that were done. Actually, one of these, the one in Canada that's not on here, that just, now I know you really can't see that, but don't worry. Edmonton Public Library just released theirs in the springtime. And I don't trust my brain to know what that number was, but it was right in there. So so Edmonton is another pretty big system. But again, geographically huge area and very unique. So these are economic impact studies done in the US. In the US, everything's bigger in the US. There's more people. Okay, geographically, they're not bigger. But you know, higher density, even in low density areas than what we experience in Canada. And there have been a lot of studies done. So keep in mind that the previous slide were all economic impact studies. These are all economic impact studies. We're not seeing any social impact studies yet, right? So Buffalo is near where I grew up. I grew up sort of in the Niagara area. You'll see that they did one in 2007, and these ROIs, so thanks to Joe Matthews, who's a colleague of mine. He's down in Carlsbad, California, and he's a library consultant, and he's written all the books about library value, all the books. So when we teach it in school, we use Joe's books. He's expressing his in ROI in dollars, and I need to talk to him about that because you shouldn't be doing that. But you'll see that, you know, $6.70. Sometimes there's ranges. Charlotte Mecklenburg County Library is between $4.61 up to $6. Douglas County, that's in Colorado. A lot of these are county libraries. Salt Lake is a county library. Some of them are urban. Phoenix Public Library is $10. Now that's a little high. So what's interesting though is that as you start looking at these, and all of these studies, by the way, I collect all these studies on a website that I have, and I can make sure that Margita has the, so you can look at all this stuff. And, you know, don't just look at the number. Understand that it's a big region, it's a county, it's a state library system, or it's an urban library system. Think about the population. Think about the population of a city like, so I'm going to think, well, you know, big cities like Denver, Phoenix, San Francisco, immense city. Their ROI numbers are going to be different. Do not be afraid to dig. Seattle Public Library is a big city. I don't know why that number's not there. Sorry about my slides, guys. But dig into the methodology. It's not complicated. It's just math. So when you're looking at these methodologies, most of the time, the methodology says, okay, we have books. We have different kinds of books. We can assign a market value to a trade paperback or to a children's book or to something that would be used for reference. And then you look at your circulation numbers and you just say, well, we circulated this many over the period of a year. You figure out what a market value would be for that item that circulated. You do the multiplication, and that's the value that's going into the community. That's one way of doing it. Another way that's doing it is, it's a bit, I don't feel as confident about it, but you're asking people, what value would you place on the library? And you ask people to think, well, you know, I think the library is worth this much. The perception piece is really, really important because perception is often much stronger than a market condition, right? So you can say, well, I can order this book from Chapters Indigo and it's going to be, you know, this trade paperback's going to cost me $12, let's say. So that's the value of me having that book. But if I really think about what it means to me to have a reading experience, the experience that I have to go into the library, to browse around the stacks, to see, I get particular pleasure in seeing a really, really busy library, right? To see lots of vibrancy happening inside. That's also value to me. So when you ask people about their perceived value of something, that counts for something too. It's a bit harder to do math on perceptions, though. So these are economic impact studies in the US. There are more going on all the time, and there's a researcher at the University of South Carolina she's actually done a meta examination of a bunch of studies to see sort of what the relationships are among all these things. And we're finding that consistently libraries are doing extraordinarily well, but yet we still have to argue to make sure that we get funding to support ourselves. So let's go to the next one. So this one is looking at, again, just economic studies globally. So Barcelona has done one. The British Library did one. You may recall that in Britain, they actually were, the public libraries there were under a great deal of stress, and it looked like they were going to close them. And it's really confusing for me to understand how that can happen in a country like Britain, who traditionally has such strong social structures. New Zealand, the guys in Australia have been doing a lot of really interesting work. The Australian studies are very, very robust, really, really well done, and a pleasure to read. So I recommend those ones. South Korea has done one. Like I said, lots in Australia. So they've done them at the state level for Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. This is the Wagga Wagga. That's a region in rural Australia. That's a really interesting one. So you'll see again that the ROI is lower than we would find in North America, but they're all consistent. They're all kind of, you know, we've got $4.44 sort of on the high-ish end. We're all the way down to $1.20. Oh, Bolton, England. Okay, that's Northern England. So you know, they're all kind of within the same range. But again, pretty consistent in terms of their methodology. Most of them are looking at the assigning a market value to library activities and then figuring out the value of those things in terms of how it helps the community. Okay, next slide, please. So this chart shows that most of the studies done are financial value of libraries. So there is a lovely woman in Germany. Her name is Roswitha Pohl, and she keeps a bibliography of all the library studies that she can find, of all the library impact studies that she can find. So I graphed out her in this bibliography. She updates it every 2 or 3 years. It's on the IFLA site, the International Federation of Library Association site. So if you were to, and if you just Google her name, it'll pop up. So she's got them all categorized, and she's categorized them into sort of general library value, which means that there's kind of a little bit of everything in there. There's quite a few studies that have been done on the impact of information literacy, and those tend to happen not only in public libraries, but also in academic libraries, because in academic libraries, we're interested in understanding the library's impact on learning and learning outcomes. Lots on academic success, very few on social impact, relatively speaking. Electronic services, yes, but financial, you'll see, is the dominant one. And the impact of school libraries, sadly, there's not enough work being done with school libraries, and it would be great to see more. And special libraries, probably because they're also special. Like, they're also individually unique. Not as many have been done. So this chart shows the difference between the bibliography that she published in 2014 and in 2016. And the darker purple, excuse me, is 2016. And so you can just see that it's the growth is coming along. Okay, next slide, please. So when it comes to impact studies, what a bunch of us are trying to do now is to move beyond looking at financial impact and looking at social impact. Well, that's harder to measure. Financial impact is relatively easy to measure because it's just numbers. We count stuff, and then we multiply it by market value, and we have a number. Not to say that doing Toronto Public Library economic impact study was not a lot of work. It was. And a great deal of effort has gone into all the other economic impact studies that have been happening in Canada. But this is harder because you have to use more qualitative measures, because you're trying to figure out if there's an impact, what were the conditions here when you began? And there's library activity in the middle there. And then what are the conditions here at the end of the period that you're looking at that you want to study? And what's the change been? And can we attribute those changes to library activity? And all of that is maybe. So I'll tell you about one study that I actually failed at. It didn't work. So I'm doing some work for the Canadian Urban Libraries Council. And so those are the big urban libraries across Canada. And a few years ago, they had their meeting in the summertime, excuse me, and I was invited to speak, to talk mostly about the TPL study. And I said, well, you know, the financial impact thing is fine, but let's really talk about the harder stuff. What are the conditions in your community that you're grappling with? So in some communities, it could be high unemployment. In St. Catharines, recently, another GM plant shut down. Something like, you know, a significant number of people are going to lose their jobs. In other communities, there's a huge amount of immigration coming in. In Brampton, Ontario, that region is growing so quickly, and it's predominantly a South Asian population that is causing that growth. So what is that doing to a community that has typically been white? What are the conditions in each of these areas, and how do you want to try to tackle these things? So we the CULC CEOs decided that there were 3 areas that they really wanted to look at. And one of those areas was the impact of the library on community employment conditions. So we decided that Oshawa, Ontario would be one, Windsor, Ontario another, and Halifax, Nova Scotia was the third system. The logistics of trying to get a research project going can be quite complicated. And unfortunately, it turned out that Windsor and Halifax couldn't participate in the end, so we had Oshawa. But I had a lot of enthusiasm with my buddies in Oshawa, and we were like ready to go. So what we did is we wanted to understand whether all of the employment support programs that Oshawa Public Library offered made any impact at all on employment rates in that community. So we had sort of all the background information in terms of from the economic development people at the city. And we knew what the current employment rates were. We understood what the demographics were. We understood what the education levels were in this community. So that was a really good starting point to sort of say, this is what it's like right now. So those are numbers, and quantitative data like that is quite comforting because they're numbers and they tend not to, they're static, they tend not to change. But then, you know, we also wanted to know how people in the community felt. So if you're someone who's underemployed and you're looking to go from part-time work to full-time work, or you've just finished school and you're looking for your first job, or you've lost your job and you need to find a new one, all of these different conditions. If you were to partake in the workshops that the library offered, use the electronic services, the job search and the skills development electronic resources that the library offered, if you felt a certain way at the beginning of that, and then after having participated in those activities, felt differently, what were the differences between how you felt? Did your confidence go up? Did you feel like that your stress decreased because you felt that there was a good chance that you would find the job that you wanted? So that sort of qualitative stuff we gather by using surveys and interviews and focus groups and things like that. So we had this beautiful methodology all set out. We had our numbers from economic development. We had our interviews, our interview questions were all set. We had a survey. We were going to use, we made it as simple as we could. We used Google Forms so that we could have staff interview people. So these libraries had tablets available to them and Chromebooks, so they could actually just fill it in, and that way we didn't have to transcribe any paper data and stuff like that. And you know what happened? No one would talk to us. I had Tim Horton gift cards, $10 each. That's a lot of coffee. To lure people into agreeing to participate, and they just wouldn't. And you know what? Because it's sensitive. That's a sensitive issue. I don't know about you guys, I've been out of work before. It's awful. It's an awful feeling. You don't want to tell people, you know, you say, oh, I'm looking, you know, and then people say, so how's it going? You found a job yet? It's awful. So what we didn't take into consideration was the human piece. People don't want to talk about this necessarily, even though my colleague at Oshawa, wonderful, wonderful, gentle, compassionate person. He's the sweetest guy, and people just did not feel comfortable talking about it. So that's a failure on our part because we forgot the human piece, and we thought that we could just collect data. Another study that we're almost finished, like I really have to finish this, is on space use. Well, that was easier because that was just observational. So we had 3 different libraries. We have Calgary Public Library and 8 branches of Calgary Public Library. So that's not all of them, but that's a good chunk of them. 1 branch at Markham and 3 branches at Brampton Public Library. And again, we just, we sort of set up this observation chart in Google Forms, and staff basically observed 9 different spaces. So we had 9 different defined spaces, and we had staff observe that. And then we also interviewed patrons as they were coming and going. Why are you here today? Did you achieve what you intended to achieve? You know, how do you feel about the library? It was a grand success because it's just space. And, you know, some people actually chose not to answer our questions because they're like, well, leave me alone, I don't want to talk to you. But we had a really, really good response rate, and so that's gone well. So I think that just those 2 examples show just how hard it is. When we're doing financial impact, really all you need to talk to are the people who work at the library who give you, you know, financial information. You do your own market research to come up with the other numbers. Trying to get in front of library users and visitors, members, patrons, whatever we're calling them these days, and actually say, how do you feel? It's a long process. It takes a long time. And sometimes they're not always truthful. So as we're trying to get closer to looking at all the things that a library does in terms of the social benefits, the cultural benefits, economic too, and educational, all these things kind of munge together. And when we're measuring one thing, for instance, space use, we're not just measuring space use. We've got a lot of data now on, so how do you feel coming into the library today? You know, and people are talking about, well, it's really noisy. Library should be quiet, you know, and there's children running around. They're talking about how, and then other people will say, well, it's so great to see all these kids in the library. Talk about newcomers to Canada, talking about how I have a circle of friends now because I met these people in the library because we all happen to be in a program together. You know, knitting circles, book clubs, cultural, social, educational, all munged in together. You can't separate them from each other. But this is the work that's really important going forward, I think. Next slide, please. Okay, so, whoops, we'll go back to the little pie. It's okay. So I just wanted to, this diagram is just to demonstrate how all these things are munged together, and you can't really say that any one given program or service only has a single purpose, whether it's improving conditions culturally, economically, socially, or educationally. It's all kind of one. But when you're doing research, you have to sort of narrow it down or you'll drive yourself crazy. You have to just sort of get as specific as you can and see if you can measure the change in conditions between the beginning, then the activity happens, and the end. So culture days, meet the author, story times, all those things you could argue are cultural, but aren't they also educational? Aren't they also social? And if you've got meet the author, and that author's book sales go up, and that author happens to live in the community where they've had the author event, then it's economic impact too. So maker spaces, meeting rooms, movies and music, you could argue that they're social. Well, they have impact in terms of education, in terms of culture. These maker spaces actually are, it's very interesting. I think that we're going to find those maker spaces are going to have more economic impact than we perhaps give them credit for. Because what I see in the maker spaces when I'm sort of visiting different libraries is that there's a lot of innovation going on in those spaces. You've got, you know, teens and kids and adults playing around, and playing around that's innovation. And that's how new ideas are born. And when you start, you know, getting to the point where it's something that's like, oh, it's a service I can offer, it's a product that I can sell, the economic impact is happening there. Just a couple more examples. So you could put language skills, studying skills, the TD Summer Reading Club into educational. It kills me that we've got TD Summer Reading Club across the country, and we don't seem to be, that data must be magical. And anyway, we have to call TD. So you could say, oh, it's all educational. Well, you know it's social. You know it's cultural. Employment support, small business support, computer skills training, ostensibly could be focused on economic, but you know that there's lots of good social interaction happening there. So it's very difficult to separate it out. The activities that a library does, always, sort of touch all four of these quadrants. But in research, we try to narrow it down so that we can actually come up with something, a useful piece of research at the end. Okay, next slide. So in terms of stakeholders, we'll talk a lot about this today, so I won't beat it to death here. But my friend Rebecca Jones always says that stakeholders are the people who have a stake in the success of your library, and they also, unfortunately, sometimes have the power to drive a stake through the heart of it. So when you're thinking about the programs and the services that you're doing, hopefully it's come from the strategic plan, which has thought about all the stakeholders in your community that you need to pay attention to. Everything from patrons, members, board members, the counselors, our local businesses, the schools, other agencies, the staff, the people who are working in your space. All of those groups have a stake in the success of the library. And so because they're all these different groups, they are unique unto themselves, and you need to think about how they perceive success. So how a child perceives a successful visit to the library is going to be very different from a small business owner, for instance. So what are those people trying to accomplish? What do they need their library for? And when you think about their needs, that's where all of the good programming and service design come from. And Rebecca Jones would tell me that it's safe to say that when a strategic plan is written with the community in mind and answering the needs of stakeholders, success will come. So we'll talk about this more, but the stakeholder piece is important simply because they're all so different. So you can't assume that you're serving one homogeneous group. They're all individual, and that's what makes it hard, actually, because everyone, and they can often be conflicting as well and contradictory. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to tell you one more story, and then we'll break. So there's a community in Oregon, Douglas County, and I got a phone call from a buddy of mine early January of this year, and it was one of those convoluted, it's like, well, a friend of ours who lives in Oregon got a call from this library system asking him if and he's an academic librarian, asking him if he knew anyone who did public library advocacy work. And he's like, well, so he called Ula, who called me, and anyway, there's about 5 of us who kind of all got together. And the problem that this community was facing was in this county, there are more trees than people. So traditionally, so it's very, very low density in terms of population, but there is it's a huge forestry area. And I guess in the previous US administration, this county had been receiving funding because the land was being used for forestry and natural resources, but because there were so few people there, the tax base was really, really low. So this county was getting kind of a funding to sort of help them run services like the library, like snow plows, like all of the municipal services that we would assume are there. But they lost the funding came to an end. So the Obama administration was sunsetting it. So the county knew that the funding was going to come to an end. They had something like I think that they had like a 5 to 7 year warning that they knew the funding was going to come to an end. But they weren't able to find another way to raise money. So in November of last year, the community voted against a tax levy to help support the libraries. So right away, if the community is voting against that, like clearly the value of the library is not obvious to that community. So there's only about 11 or 12 libraries. So the final branch closed in May of this year. And then the Friends of the Library, so these are the guys who called us in a panic, right? Because they called us to close in like June 1st, right? Not enough runway, guys. So what they did is they formed a nonprofit organization to run the libraries using volunteers. So that's okay for now, but it's not really sustainable. And then, so because the libraries were, owned by the municipality, they were closed by the county. And then in early July, the county agreed to allow the Friends to open them again. So like literally on May 31st, they locked the doors and they just left. So now they're reopening them. So the stakeholder conversation is really, really important because you don't want this to happen. And in Canada, in Ontario, we are really lucky that our funding model is what it is. But as we know, it's not enough. And you have to continually advocate for the value of the library. So this is something that, if I would like to think that if the library had engaged their stakeholders more successfully, maybe this wouldn't have happened. It's hard to know. But yeah, sad story. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to work on today is identifying stakeholders, figuring out what they want, what they need. I used to work for a business school. What's their Achilles heel? What's their pain spot? Where are they feeling pain? Where can the library alleviate that pain? What can we do in order to demonstrate value to the individual stakeholders, not the homogeneous group? We have to, when we're thinking about measuring value, we have to measure what matters to them, not what matters to us, and not what's easy to count. Circulation, that's easy to count. It doesn't mean it's useful. And the use of consistent methodologies over time. At the Ontario Library Association, there's a group of us who are working in the Child and Youth Services subgroup of OPLA. We're actually in the middle of an exercise right now where we're taking all the surveys that we can find that anyone has ever done, and we're trying to make a consistent core foundation survey that everybody can use. If we have a consistent survey tool, we can start comparing things across. If it's inconsistent, we can't compare apples and oranges. So we don't have that longitudinal data, that data that we collect over a long period of time. In all of our libraries, we do tons of surveys, but we're not using the same consistent tool to do so. So that data doesn't tend to be useful to anybody but that library. And oh, by the way, we don't share enough either. We're all doing all kinds of surveys and things. We're not sharing it with each other effectively enough. So if we can work towards a standard process for measuring common impacts, that's really would be great. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to move to table discussion. We're a little past. But what I'd like you guys to do is to think about who your stakeholders